Welcome to Stroud's History of Dissent. We have a long and proud history in Stroud of not putting up with any shit. And we have some speakers here to tell us about some really, really incredible and inspiring campaigns that they were part of or are part of that have really kind of shown the power of people. And so without further ado, I'd like to go to our first speaker, and that's Harry, and he's going to tell us about the campaign to protect Stroud High Street. He's going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. So if you can think of all of your exciting questions, pop them in the chat. And then when he's finished speaking, I'll field the questions. So once again, if your cameras could be off and if you could be on mute, and I'd like to welcome Harry to speak. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'll give you a brief rundown of where I ended up in Stroud. I moved originally to Gloucestershire in 1974, down to Saul, and after spending 4 years there, then I moved into the Old Common and set up one of my current businesses, which is a little joinery business. At the time, Keith Morgan and Bayer had just started the Old Convent workshops together with someone called Peter Waller. And that became a little bit of a hub. I met someone called Steve Tomlin and his partner, Deborah Kedge. And very soon there was a whole new community developing in Stroud. Very often, people from London. A lot of us, there was quite a lot of London accents around, as there is now. And one of the new entrants who wasn't from London, of course, was Tom Birmingham, George Perry, and a few others, Patrick Mansfield, and they were engaged in starting shard training workshops, which then set up a cafe called Starters Cafe, which was at the time in 57 High Street. And that became a pretty popular place in the end, actually. And besides being a very good cafe, it was also very much a hub for information. If you remember that during this period, of course, mobile phones were a long way off. You were pretty lucky if you had a landline, actually. So I had a landline at work, but I certainly didn't have one at home. So during this period, there was quite a lot of change planned in Stroud. Stroud was quite a difficult place at the time. If you can imagine a high street that had two-way traffic, plus pavements on either side. What we called the Great Wall near Cornhill didn't exist. Cornhill itself didn't exist. So there was pretty much gridlock, bedlam. I mean, bearing in mind there weren't that many cars around either, they still managed to jam the place up quite effectively. Anyway, the story goes that there was one particular family in Stroud called the Millwoods, who owned a shoe shop in the High Street, and they began buying up a large number of properties in the High Street, and very soon it became evident that their plan was to demolish the whole lot, particularly on the left-hand side as you go up, and to build another brand new shopping centre, a la Merrywalks. This was being done very much, shall we carefully say, in collusion with the local authority and the planning department in particular. Now, as time went on, they realised they were going to have to demolish them. So we were certainly feeling that this was a very sort of self-destructive move, actually, and that in fact a very fine set of buildings with frontages which go back to the sort of Georgian period, we were going to lose them all. So we set up in order to list those that weren't listed. So they had to apply for listed planning consent to actually demolish them. And they were obviously prepared to grant themselves listed building consent, but obviously we challenged it. In the meantime, they erected scaffolding along the front of the buildings and scaffolding at the back, and eventually parked 2 refuse lorries along the frontage as well, to give out the message that these buildings were now dangerous, and therefore that was the reason why they wanted them demolished. So we held a meeting, as you do, just outside the back of 57, alongside the scaffolding, and very quickly formed the Stroud High Street Action Group. And we decided to divide the action group into two parts. One which would form a very legal entity, which would actually challenge this grant of demolition in the High Court, and then another group of us who would just take direct action, because the action was literally imminent. It was within at a certain point within a few hours. So a group of us immediately basically climbed the scaffolding, went up to the ceilings, and we spent, I think at that period, 3 days on the roof to stop the immediate demolition. In the meantime, there were Mike Goodenough, I think Julian Osborne, a couple of others were at the High Courts in London in order to try and gain this injunction to stop them actually demolishing the building. At one point, we thought we were safe, and we did come down, but it very quickly became apparent that they were going to try and start knocking it down before the injunction could be granted. So we went back up again. We were kind of fortunate in the way a lot of action goes, in that it was a fairly nice period. It was May, the weather was not benign. We did get rain and so on, so we did spend some fairly sleepless nights up there, but it was actually a really nice experience. It was kind of one of those things that you don't often do in your life, if you actually watch 24 hours of life unfold beneath you in the middle of the high street and see everything that goes on. It was really quite a privilege, actually, just to watch life sort of come and go as it does. So anyway, eventually the upshot of it was that we actually got the injunction, and the injunction itself had a huge amount of meaning, not just for Stroud but for the entire country, because it established the precedent that the danger of collapse of a building was not a automatic right to demolish. The onus was on the owner in order to actually make the building safe first, before any kind of demolition order could be granted. So besides actually saving that particular frontage at that time, it also ensured that no one else could in future use that precedent. Interestingly, the group itself, obviously the Stroud Action Group had that success, but having got the injunction, we then actually had a huge bill for obviously the legal services we used to actually get the injunction. So we spent the next couple of years actually raising money, which led us into whole other areas as well. It led us into putting on gigs in the marshal rooms to raise money. We had some fairly spectacular events there. And the other way that I'd completely forgotten about was, in fact, a group of us got together and we formed a kind of small building company, and we actually re-roofed, I think it was 3 roofs actually in the Stroud area, and donated the money, the labour costs, to the Stroud Hazard Action. So it was all sorts of things came out of it. Obviously, the Stroud Preservation Trust emerged from it. That was one part of it. It was at a period in time in 1980 when, in fact, there was rising unemployment. There were all sorts of problems with the employment industry when Thatcher came to power and managed to cause mayhem. And obviously, the Preservation Trust then set up the little building group with the Manpower Services Commission, as it was known then, and they then bought the buildings at the Cross. They were given them for £1 from the local authority. So there was a whole bunch of other stuff actually emerged from it, and it certainly solidified a very sort of emerging consensus amongst, well, particularly amongst the newcomers. Uh, there was division in the town. There was a group of people who probably thought that these incomers really ought to keep themselves to themselves and not be quite so active about this. But I think I'm pretty confident in saying that I don't think there's hardly anyone now who would say that uh, the end result wasn't pretty much the best outcome. Anyway, I think that's enough for me for the time being. And I shall look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Harry. That was an absolutely brilliant story. I kind of knew a little bit about this, but I didn't know about your sort of really very clever combination, I think, of the administrative and bureaucratic and legal procedures with just direct action as well. So yeah, that was really fantastic. And also, I just can't help thinking, wouldn't it make a really beautiful film? Any filmmakers amongst us feel inspired to do that. Um, I don't know, Harry, if you meant to, but your camera's gone off. And we'd love to see you if you wanted to kind of answer the questions. That's
That
brilliant.
better, sorry.
You're
So
back.
I was a bit premature there, sorry.
No worries. Yeah, just incredibly efficient. Yeah, so if people want to switch back on their cameras, because we'll go for the question time now, and it's quite nice to then see people. So iPhone 105, who I'm identifying as Val, has a question in the chat. How many buildings roughly did you save, and can you tell us them so we can recognise which ones they are today?
Well, it was from 57 through to 61. So that pretty much from where the what was the trustee savings bank on the left hand side upwards, from what is now kind of Millets going through to Boots, then going on to Moonflower, and along to the edge of the Shambles. So the roof we actually occupied was the roof of number 57. So that was where the refuse lorries were parked down the bottom, a little bit further down. We had a fairly good view of the kind of where Kendrick Street joins, so we had a good view, active view of what was going on in town, and that was just the easiest one to access going up through Starter's Cafe.
Fantastic. Barbara comments that she hadn't known about the legal precedent you set, so well done. And Gill asked, is there a sign in the high street thanking the people who saved it?
I don't think there is. There's a few blue plaques around. I mean, if you kind of try and take characters out of it's quite difficult. But I mean, the ones, I mean, we all know who the ones were. We all know, I mean, Julian Osborne was one of the main instigators of it. And we had a lot of help from his cousin, who was the MP for Derby, Philip Whitehead. He gave us access. He was also a lawyer as well. So he gave us access to the kind of legal services we needed, and fairly quick access to the High Court, obviously, to get the injunction fairly quickly. I mean, people like Anne McIntosh, who you probably know as well. I mean, huge amounts of work that they did. It was really quite epic. And I mean, at the time, Anne Mac was. I mean, they were fairly fresh in Stroud. She was a young mother. She had children everywhere. Ian was a teacher at I think Marling at the time, actually. So it was, yeah, it was a lot of people from a very broad spectrum, and the general thought was that we needed a group of people to do the legal part, but there was a whole bunch of us who weren't worried about criminal records or that aspect of our life. I mean, I've a group of us obviously who never had to sort of apply for jobs and things like that with a criminal record. It's a lot easier if you haven't got that worry, to think, well, okay, if I get one, it's so what, it's neither here nor there. So that was what made the combination quite kind of effective, really. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, let's start the campaign for a plaque, guys. So then Stella asks, was it just the frontages that were saved?
Effectively, it was, yes. I mean, what we did recognise right from the very start, that in fact the rear of the buildings were not only unusable, but were also kind of not making the most of it anyway. So we recognised completely that in order to attract someone like Boots, you were going to have to create a much bigger space behind them. But it meant that we could do things like build with his yard, which in fact the Preservation Trust actually inspired in the end. And I mean the other person who must get a big mention of this is Richard Fielder, who's not with us anymore actually, but he established a big big architects partnership with in Bath called Field and Clegg, and he gave us endless help. You know, he was a complete inspiration on his own. You know, he had a terrific ability to deal with the local authority. You know, and it came from great authority, and he was a local chap as well, actually. So again a very powerful combination that was difficult to resist, actually.
So Barbara has a couple of comments that Ian Mack taught at Beaufort and that the buildings at the Cross were restored were also down to the Stroud Preservation Trust. And Bill said it's documented in the Memories of Stroud book, which you can hold up to your camera, Bill. There we go, look. Memories of Stroud, look at that. That's brilliant. And
I'll just a minute. I'll just yeah, because there's a few lovely photos. I just happened to get this book a couple of weeks ago, so there's some great photos of the whole thing, of the procession. And there's the wonderful person that abbreviated Stroud High Street Action Group to SHAG, who was very proud of that, in fact. So, yeah. Yeah, no, it's I just got this book a couple of weeks ago. It goes through lots of histories, but there's 20 pages about these campaigns. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Bill. Thanks for sharing that. That's wonderful. And Adrian said that he was working for Stroud District Council at the time of the sit-in, and you could see from the windows at the back, and he seems to remember you had a hard time from the council at the time. Is that right?
We did. We had a hugely hard time for them, and we had a hard time later on as well. Actually, I mean, they obviously knew who we were as identified as individual. And I did a project afterwards with Steve Tomlin. We bought Piccadilly Mill, which is near Lynn, and we restored that and converted that into multiple use. And they had a very good attempt to shut us down on that. A very good attempt that very nearly succeeded. Actually, that ended up in the court as well. They had a real sort of vendetta. But we usually had an answer for it, so you know it's not that hard. You know, you just got to stand your ground and just dig in and just you know again we were up against it financially. You know, we were virtually bankrupt. You know, if you remember sort of that period between 80, 83, 84, there were bankruptcies everywhere amongst us kind of self-employed. It was horrendous, you know. But because of that, no one had anything to lose, you know. So you held on fiercely to anything you get your hands on, you know. And we weren't going to give ground just for the sake of it, you know. By that time, we'd established all these principles about not being able to just knock a building down because you don't happen to like where it is. So yeah, we followed that one through. Yeah.
Well, that is really fantastic. We've just got final comment that Anne Mack is here with us tonight, so welcome, Anne. And yeah, I think we really have a lot to thank you for, Harry. You know, our generation and our children's generation, Stroud is a high street that now has a fantastic, it's a wonderful place to be. It's a great market on Saturday, and that's, you know, that's a large part down to your efforts. So thank you very much. And just yes, yes, Barbara, tapping away. That was a really fantastic and interesting talk. Thank you. So we're just about on time, I think. So we'll move on now to our next speaker, who's Adrian, and he's going to tell us about a campaign to protect the Stratford Park trees. So everyone, cameras off and take it away, Adrian. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Can I share my screen, please?
You should be able to, if you go to the bottom, your share screen should be lit up green and you should be able to press that.
Where is that?
Becky, I think you need to make him a co-host.
Yes, possibly.
Share the screen.
Oh,
there we go.
You've got it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so how do I do it now?
If you click on the share screen, have you got the share screen option?
I have.
And then if you click on that.
Right. It's not working for me. Share screen options.
Adrian, do you want me to put the slides up and you can just tell me when to move on?
That would be good, please, Lynn. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
Cool. Thanks. So the campaign to save Stratford Park trees, that came a few years after Harry and the High Street campaign. And again, it was a point of time 35 years ago, late 80s, no mobile phones, very little technology. But there was a lot of people already that have been mentioned that had experience of taking on the council. So
you need to click on beginning, from the beginning.
What if I just click on this one?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what's going on because...
No, if you go up to the top left, where it says from beginning, just above where you clicked. Yeah, there.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn. Next slide, please. So these are the trees in question. So to orientate you, you've got Stratford Park and then the road going down along the bottom, and the trees are along that wall. There were a number of trees, originally around 35, 40. Next slide, please. But it came down to a much smaller number of 12. So that's what they look like on the left. That was a postcard from the time. And on the right, it's kind of the canopy where the trees remain at the moment. It's difficult now to get an accurate representation, but that gives you a feeling for where they were. Next slide, please, Lynn. So this was the issue, and this was reported in The Independent. It all seemed perfectly innocuous when an anti-Tory coalition on the council wanted to appease the lobby who wanted an out-of-town superstore. So they had Tesco's had a piece of land, and they wanted permission to build. They could only do that, the district council said, if they straightened the road. And to do that, the district council would sell them a very small strip of parkland for £350,000. That is about £1 million in today's money, just to give you an idea. What could possibly go wrong? Next slide, please, Lynn. So that's The Independent that wrote up, as you can see, a pretty detailed explanation of the issue. And peeping out from behind one of the trees there is Ron Birch. And the other photograph was of Val Gardner. So there was as I say, there was a groundswell that wanted to save the trees and thought that the idea of pulling them down was just bonkers. A public meeting was called by Veronica Wood, and what you'll notice throughout this is the nominative determinism of people involved in the campaign. So we had Ron Birch, Veronica Wood, and Sue Lim, who was another one. Veronica called the public meeting, and from that, a petition was started. And as it was Christmas, we decided to produce a Christmas card, which we distribute to local shops and along with the Stroud Goodwill Evening. Next slide, please, Lynn. Card is on the left. As you can see, tongue-in-cheek, seasonal greetings to SDC for a far-sighted decision. We took a newspaper ad, but we weren't allowed to put that in there. But we gave it out to the following businesses. Now, Val Gardner, who was the leader of the district council at the time, had very sadly lost one of her children on Stratford Road some 18 years beforehand. But that was much further up, so closer to where the Tesco's Express at the Maypole is, and a hell of a long way from where this piece of road was. Next slide, please, Lynn. As you can see, some people didn't like our Christmas cards. One councillor said the cards were childish and would not achieve anything because to them it was important that the trees came down. Next slide, please, Lynn. So knowing that we were going to go into a fairly hefty fight with the council, we set up Teresa's appeal with a plea to people to donate and to raise £5,000 for the campaign. Next slide, please. And we started to mobilise. We got people to create banners, to parade through the town. You can see in the bottom left there the site of the Tesco. And we rallied at the bandstand in Stratford Park. Next slide, please. We got our supporters to write to newspapers. In those days, there were a lot more newspapers. So there was obviously Stroud News and Journal. We had a Western Daily Press with a local reporter. We had Stroud Observer. And there was another one, which name escapes me. But it was all about keeping the issues in the public mind. Next one, please. Then. And as you can see, they were fairly lengthy questions. It was all about building support. Next slide, please. We even got the support of the now King, as you can see on the left-hand side there. And one of the things that we did was we encouraged alternative solutions. And on the right-hand side is Dr. John Adams, who was a boffin, as they like to call him. But the Western Daily Press got him along, and he basically said, no, there is no need to have a scheme to cut down the trees. You can do it in a lot simpler way. Next slide, please, Lynn. And that was essentially the layout that you see there. So the installation of mini roundabouts, that's why we've got so many mini roundabouts. But it was a way to keep the trees and not straighten the road. If you didn't need to straighten the road, you didn't need to widen it. If you didn't need to widen it, you didn't need to take the trees down. And what's interesting in that piece is that the whole idea was a very new one at the time. As I say, we're going back to the late 80s, so 35 years ago. Next slide, please, Lynn. We did have a mobile phone. It was lent to us by an anonymous donor. It was about the size and weight of a car battery, and it was pretty unreliable. But there you see from the day our own telephone tree. So if anything happened, you phoned the people below you, and then they phoned people below them. Next slide, please, Lynn. Over the spring and summer of '89, we became increasingly concerned about the council's motives. They started putting up picket fencing, and they carried out a number of dirty tricks. They snuck in and ring barked. And if you can see the photograph on the right there, just where the arrow is, that's a ring barked tree from those days. Ring barking can cause the death of a tree because it removes the living tissue from around the trunk. But as you can see in that case, that tree still survived. To overcome that, we got chain link fencing and put that around the trunks of the trees. Next slide, please, Lynn. So one of the issues that we had suspected was that the council would come and attempt to fell the trees when nobody was looking. That was effectively going to be over a Saturday night into Sunday morning, the quietest time. So we used to have an encampment there. Every Sunday morning, we would go along, we would talk about rumours and our plans. And then we decided that the only way to keep the trees safe was to build platforms in some of them. And that's the ones that you can see on the right. We were up there for a few weeks, and then, next slide, please. On the night of the 23rd, 24th of August, things suddenly changed. Next slide, please. We had a tip-off that a security firm was hiring people from the job centre for 50 quid to come and do a job in Stroud. The security firm was based in Bristol, and they bussed up these people from Bristol. They tipped off the police, and there were numerous police in vans there on the night. There is a video on YouTube, and I'll supply a link which could be sent out afterwards. It's 13 minutes, but it sort of shows the whole of the attempt to remove the protesters by these security guards very badly over the evening, and they came in at just gone 5:20 in the morning. I would urge anyone to watch it, because the way that protesters were handled then compared to what Gill and Just Stop Oil are being dealt with nowadays was very, very different. There's a classic where somebody shouts, "Will you get off me? Do you know who I am?" Obviously, they didn't. Next slide, please, Lynn. And next one. Next one. It all got a little bit rowdy. The chap you can see with the strap and camera around his neck is Bob Eccles, who was on the district council. Next slide. People were pointing all over the place. Those people who were volunteers sat around the trees, linked arms, and basically practiced non-violent resistance. So everything from linking arms to lying down. Next slide, please. Lots of confusion, lots of going on, and there was me wondering what the hell's happening and quite why I'm in a photograph. that was a really strange night. But after a while, the police, who were in full strength, decided that there was no way that the protesters could be removed, let alone brought down from the trees. So they instructed the council, and the chap with his back to you and the hard hat is Mike Snell. He was the council's director responsible for the felling at the time, had to call it off. Next slide, please. And there you can see the press cuts from the night. And as you can see, Val's private army, Val Gardner, the councillor, was accused of bringing in this army. It was a fairly frightening and yeah, quite ignominious night for people who were there and who'd never done anything before that in their life. Next slide, please, Lynn. After all that, we didn't really trust the council not to come back, so we continued our treetop sit-ins until I think it was around about September, when we reached an agreement that nothing could be done without notifying us first. The council said that they were going to go to a public inquiry for a date in January. As a result, it meant that we could basically dismantle the tree houses and step back, which was just as well because it was starting to go into pretty bad weather at that time. And then next slide, please, Lynn. And there you see end of January, after a public meeting, the county council decided that the tree planning, the road widening could be adopted. Sorry, the road calming could be adopted. It was referred to as a continental scheme. It had never been tried in the UK before. Tesco's agreed to pay for it. That meant that the works could start, and the rest is history. And as you'll see that Laurie Lee penned one of his infamous little ditties. I think it was stolen from somebody else, but I think I shall never see a Tesco lovely as a tree, and if we're forced to cut ours down, it will shame the gateway to our town. Pleased to say that some of the trees are still there to this day, some 35 years later. So yeah, it did work, and we did bring about change. So non-violent direct action did help in saving those trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. That was really brilliant. I kept getting that little sign up saying you are muted because I was laughing. I love the themes that are coming out of both the talks so far about, this sort of especially in that one, the use of humor actually is really powerful, isn't it? But also the use of people, people bringing themselves and their physical presence along, and their bodies, really being part of the protest, and just this idea that actually it takes quite an effort to bring authorities around back to sense again in both of these cases. Who thought that widening and straightening a road would make the traffic slower and safer? Not sure. You have to think at some point maybe, the people kind of trying to do that and sneakily take down the trees might have felt that they were in that Mitchell and Webb sketch where they're like, are we the baddies? But yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to scroll down and get some questions and comments. So Simon Pickering said, we did have a mobile phone at night up the tree. It was the size of a small suitcase and had a massive battery. Yeah, themes of old technology as well being coming up. So yep, Stella also points to the nominative determinism that you mentioned at the beginning, Aid. I think that's really important, probably huge part of the success. And that she was a local reporter for Stroud Mercury and also Laurie Lee's poem. And
that's it, the Stroud Mercury. It was the Mercury Observer and Stroud News and Journal.
Yeah, very illustrious reporter in Stella. And then she's also said she got told by a local superintendent that the trees would be taken down in the middle of the night when she did a press call to the police. Barbara Emery asks, were some moments must have been frightening. Was that the case, Adrian?
Yeah, absolutely. It was pitch dark up there. They had the electricity board, MEB, who, because there are electricity wires that ran through the canopy, they cut the electricity, so it was pitch dark. So yeah, you know, if you were round the bottom of a tree, it was basically you stayed there because you couldn't see very much else.
Yeah. So Bob says one of the key things here was coming up with a better and viable alternative. So do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for all of us from the start, we knew that what they were planning was just bonkers. And a lot of the money went into, I remember, and so I see Simon's on the call, he might remember better. We got a guy from Holland, a traffic planner from Holland, to get in touch. And he did something I seem to remember around shared space, you know, which up until recently we've had in this country. I see the Tories have outlawed that. But it was about sort of, yeah, proving that there were alternatives. But obviously that did cost a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah. So then turns out it's actually all Stella's fault. She said she told Fred in the pub what had been told by the police, and then it all kicked off. So I think we have to, yes, thank you, Stella. And Simon says again, the traffic calming scheme was drawn up with help from the National Friends of Earth and various Dutch experts.
Yeah.
The public inquiry did open, but the district offered no evidence, and we handed over our file. And Lynn says, Stella, you're a brave and ethical reporter. And then Kevin said, I was 5 at the time and remember visiting family friends in the trees. Brilliant. Many years later, I realised how much this influenced my sense of justice and activism. It was actually Hannah on Kevin's iPad. Brilliant.
Yeah, well, I was working for Lloyd's of London at the time. I was living in Rogborough and going off to the city and then coming home. And I just thought, this is bonkers. I can't reconcile this. And I actually stood for election for the Green Party in Rogborough in 1990. Got beaten by Labour and the Tories, but it was my first foray into green activism.
Amazing.
Yeah, it sort of lit my fire as well.
That's brilliant. That's so good. I think that's another theme that's kind of coming out from this. Both of the stories just so incredibly inspiring. When I don't know about you, but I know I often feel quite hopeless these days with everything that's going on around you. So to know that these two kind of incredible campaigns just really paid off from sheer tenacity and determination and a lot of bloody mindedness. Which is an essential ingredient. That's fantastic. Adrian, thank you so much. We're going to go on to Gill now, who's going to tell us about bring us up to the present and the future with her incredible work with Just Stop Oil. Thank you so much, Gill.
Thank you. I'm just going to try to share my screen now, so I hope it'll work. Have I got it? I've got found my green. Is it sharing? And have I got the right?
If you click on what it is you want to share.
There we go.
That's perfect. Well done.
All right, one sec. There we are. Is that okay?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd lost you all then. Okay, first of all, thank you to both Harry and Adrian, and to all the people who've participated in the gaps between then and now. You know, XR, there have been so many really powerful people and brave people doing amazing things. And I found both your stories sort of humbling and inspiring. It's a funny thing with Stroud, isn't it? I've only lived here since '96, and until I got here, I was a really good girl. And I thought perhaps there's something in the water that makes people sort of turn to dissent. But listening just now, I realise it's the people you meet and the stories you hear told. And I think storytelling is a crucial part of a community and of a community sort of values and our ethos. And I think what we've got now, we've been able to look at your stories from the future, as it were, and to see that your dissent and your confrontation of what was bonkers has worked. So we know the ends of your stories and we can celebrate. But both stories have told us that actually in the midst of that dissent, you don't know whether you're going to be successful or not. And there are moments of fear, there are moments of not really knowing where you're going. And it's almost just about having to be actively trying, active hope in a way, trying to create the end of the story that you want it to be. And I think that's where we find ourselves. So it's important, sort of, stories are important, and it's important which stories we tell. So I'm going to try to tell you a brief story, really, of Stroud's involvement in Just Stop Oil. But obviously, I'm picking this up off the back of all. Some people here will have been with Insulate Britain, with XR, and I come in later than that. So we are on the shoulders of a huge movement that's been going on in Stroud for a long time. But I will begin with this brief story of, first of all, this is on Waterloo Bridge in November this year. How did these two people, me there, as an English teacher, Adam Beard, also a Stroudy there, I checked I could use his name, as a gardener, how did we come to be walking across the Waterloo Bridge on a rainy November day? I don't even remember being at the front. I think this was actually a bit we'd broken off when some people had already been arrested. And how did we end up in handcuffs? How did we end up in police vans, in those caged vans? How did we end up, with a lot of other people in police cells for over 24 hours? And then in caged vans again the next day to court? And how have we ended up in this situation that we've been to court twice, we still have our court cases pending, and with the increasingly difficult sort of things that the government is doing, the sentencing, with the unlikely possibility of a 2-year jail sentence for the action that you see us doing there, walking for about 10 minutes on Waterloo Bridge. And so that's kind of the story I want to look at. And it's actually, how did it happen? It's very simple and very straightforward. So the summer of 2022, I had just given up teaching because I wanted to devote my professional career to tackling all the massive problems we see around us. And I also wanted to have some time for activism, and whether it was serendipity or what, but somebody in Stroud, a young person, gave me a leaflet for Just Stop Oil. And they were doing a talk that afternoon or that evening in Lansdowne Hall. So I went along, and I was the only person. And I felt terrible because there were these two young people, probably in their 20s, who'd already been arrested, had come from Bristol to do this talk. And it was just me. So I offered to do another talk on their behalf because they couldn't come another date. Leafleted like crazy around Stroud, and got, eventually it was a decent audience, of whom Adam was one. And somehow we sort of had an energy, and that day was the beginning of building up a sort of group of Just Stop Oil people, if that's what it was, in Stroud, or people who it's not a group, and it's not a membership thing at all. It's sort of a vehicle that we've chosen to use to try to make our difference. And it's been interesting. Our group in Stroud it's fluid because some people, your courage waxes and wanes, really. So sometimes people are ready to step up to action. Sometimes they just can't hack it anymore and have to step back. We've got a sort of fluid group of about 20. And I'd say of those, a good 10 to, well, initially we took a whole busload up to one of the marches before things became more serious and arrestable and stuff. But I'd say of whom about 10 or around 10 have probably been arrested at least once each. And it's not a badge of honor. It just means that it's just a sign that we're not prepared to bow to, if when they say get off the road or we'll arrest you, and you think, well no. So that's why we get arrested. But what I don't know whether you know, but when there's a Just Stop Oil action, they'll have a period of weeks, and each region of the UK is given responsibility for a week. So the Southwest will have a certain week in November, and then will be followed by the North or whatever. But the Southwest has a reputation for being the largest contingent, the largest group, and for very often pushing the Overton window to see if we can, be a bit more imaginative with what we do. And I think it's fair to say that Stroud, as a small town, really does punch above its weight in terms of the numbers we contribute to these marches and to the sort of roles we play within them. So again, Stroud's Dissent is taking itself to London. It just seems to be a tradition. I don't always know what it is that's done it. Next slide is, I've got something written across the top of here, so I don't know if you can see on your screens. You're probably okay. It's a comment by Alice Jolly. And because I was going to say, what is it like to take these actions? And if you can read Alice's comment there, admitting that it's really quite scary. Adrian said about the fear that you feel. And the fear is two things. I mean, one is it just feels so weird to take that first step of transgression, to cross that line into dissent rather than, I guess, our normal obedient compliance. It is sort of, to an extent, I think what you just referred earlier to, are we the bad people? Are we the villains now? And it's a very strange thing in your head. And also, it's scary because you've seen the aggression that we can encounter on the streets. But to be honest, the real fear, the really hard bit of it is, I mean, one time I went to London fully intending to do one of those roadblocks, and I found a really good reason not to do it. But I have to say the Just Stop Oil community is an absolutely wonderful community within which to disappoint yourself, because no one gives you the impression that you've disappointed them. It couldn't be more loving and supportive. But I think the reason I couldn't do it that day, and what you have to draw on in order to take these actions, is you have to be brutally honest with yourself about the climate catastrophe that we're facing. And it's only when you can enter that space that you're prepared to put your body on the line in this way and to face whatever it is you're going to, you relinquish all agency the minute you step onto the road, really. And you can only do that if you've really engaged with why you're there. And so anyway, once you're actually on the road, you feel like you're in the right place, and whatever happens, you just think, I'm doing the right thing. I'm where I need to be. So what you're seeing here is the two gentlemen being arrested are both Stroudies. And again, I've got their permission to show these. Well, one, I forgot the other. And the other one is, we created a mums march. You can see we're walking from Trafalgar Square there along Whitehall. That's it. And it was a lot of mums and grandmothers, and we cast aside the orange banners and we walked with more emotive messages, purely for the love of our children and for all children. And that was a really moving and powerful march that we did. And there were a lot of, it was probably a good number of Stroud mums and grandmas in that one. But of course, again, that resulted, as you'll see in the bottom right, in arrests and another night in the cells for people. And for a lot of us, that was our first arrest. And it was scary and moving and emotional. But having said that, it's not negative. It brings a great sense of peace. That I was in the cell that night thinking, this is where I need to be. And I've spoken to many other people who've done the same thing. And this is exactly what I'm just in the right place. That accords with all my values. It's a visceral sense of, bad as this is right. So yeah, why do it? I think, as Adrian said, I actually wrote down what he said. We know that what they were planning was just bonkers. And I think that's why we're there. We know that what is going on is just bonkers. Ho Sung Lee of the, I think he's the chair of the IPCC, or was, I'm not sure there, but he said, what keeps him awake at night isn't the climate science, isn't where we're headed. It's the unanswerable question to him of, why aren't we doing what we know we must do? And, Guterres has said that, delay is death. So why on earth are we continuing? I mean, you could say, do people know? Do people know the science? Yeah. I mean, it's sort of hidden from us quite convincingly, isn't it? Quite effectively, with distraction and doubt and so on. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here, so I'm not going to chuck lots of facts, but people understand that climate collapse is going to take us to societal collapse, which is going to, on a local and global scale, to the collapse of law and order. And you have to face that brutal honesty with emotional engagement, I think, in order to really, really feel that you need to take action. The trouble is, I don't actually think that facts are what work. You know, we've known since the 70s where we're headed, what the science is like, really, if we were prepared to accept it. But and since then, we've released more CO2 than done more damage than the whole of human history up until that point, and that's on our watch. So the other brutal truth, which is one you all members of the Green Party here, aren't we? Is that politics is broken, and that's one of the key messages of Just Stop Oil. And I feel like a weirdly radical thing saying this, but the thing is that almost the radicals are the ones in government. The politics is broken, and we're currently, you know, we could be seen to be run by extremists and criminals, and almost to get a voice heard, to get the story told, to seize the story is very, very difficult because the dominant voice, the dominant narrative is coming from the fossil fuel industry, which is kind of bought democracy at the moment. So how do we get our narrative, our story out there? How do we shape the next chapter is very, very difficult. And that feels like the battle that we're in. And it feels like at the moment, the best we can hope for is some slight reforms, a slightly reformist attitude. So I'm going to say something here that is a Just Stop Oil line, and I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but we don't need reform. We need revolution. And actually a Green Party government would be revolutionary in that way. But we're in the system. So I think what we need is a revolution. It's not to do with blood and guillotines and blood rolling down the streets of London. I think I've never met anyone in Just Stop Oil who has anything other than absolute respect for the rule, for the social order, for the rule of law and order. And we understand its importance to all of our lives, all of our well-being. But the trouble is when that's based on the wrong values, when values behind those authorities are wrong, resistance kind of feels necessary. It was necessary to climb those trees. It was necessary to occupy the houses, the buildings in the high street. And it feels necessary now to take action. You know, there are so many things in history when you look back, like the stories we've heard today, and it's absolutely clear that to cooperate with a given order and to cooperate with an authority which is based on something that is against our values is a betrayal of humanity, really. And so I suppose we are breaking the law in order not to be guilty, in a way. And I think that's what the stories tonight have told. And you know, what do we mean by civil resistance? Adrian referred to non-violent direct action. To take part in any Just Stop Oil action, you have to have had at least a day of training on this in order not to respond even verbally aggressively to anything that happens, to be able to hold your space. And I think that's crucial. And it's important for lots of reasons. One, it's proven to be effective. History has shown that non-violent direct action is one of the greatest sort of precipitators of social reform. But I think one of the really major ways that it's important is it shows an alternative way of being. We don't have to fight. We don't have to be aggressors. We don't have to bully. And actually, we need to think now of alternative ways of living and being in the future, because we need to build something better. We need, as you said earlier, we need an alternative. We need the wiggly road when they want the straight road, you know. And so the non-violence action is in a way demonstrating what we think can be achieved. So yeah, and so the story continues to unfold of civil resistance. And Barbara, you said before, we have been good so far because the next part of the action is being planned. And it is out in the open that the very difficult thing to get our heads around is the next part of the resistance strategy that Just Stop Oil is doing. They're doing other things, is going to be based in disruption at airports. And of course, that is horrible. It's going to be over the summer. It's awful. And some of you will be thinking, oh, no, my flight. And I'm thinking, oh, no, my daughter's flights. And it's horrible. And it shouldn't be necessary at all. If we were in a sane world where we weren't all journeying towards this cliff and getting faster and faster as we head towards it, none of this would be necessary. We'd be having a nice time. But I think what's important is in this sort of resistance, it's different. I'm struggling. I don't even know whether I can participate in it, but some people are, and I can do all the arguments for it. But that seeing like resistance as a communicative act, it's not against, like just like when we were in London, it wasn't against the drivers. And in this case, it's not against people who are choosing to fly, who've, you know, saved up for a holiday. It's a communicative act to try to seize the narrative, to try to take control of the story, but also symbolically at airports, I think, to show that we do need a revolution in the way we think and the way we act, and to try and use that as a point of to bring that to the fore. But it's horrible. And I don't really know where I'm going to be on it, because we are at the most bizarre point in history, I think, where acting out of love for others, because how do you explain when you're in an airport and you're holding people up that you're acting out of love for them? But acting out of love for others, whether that's of our family, love for our community, and love for humanity, has become an act of dissent and has become a subversive thing to do. I mean, that, if anything, is a sign of how broken our times are at the moment, when to act purely out of love is subversive and punishable. And I know that's a little simplistic, because it is horrible to hold up people's holidays. So there, but I think ultimately it's about acting on values. And if you decide what your values are, then you can create a vision of what you want. And most people have the same values when you get down to the core of us as human beings. And most of us would be enchanted by the same visions of what could be achieved. And once you've got that vision, then you have to work towards it. You have to work towards that being the next chapter, the following chapters of your story. And you can't just hope for it. Hope has to be active. And so that's, I think, has been evident in all these stories. You can't just hope the high street won't be knocked down. You can't just hope the trees don't get sawn down. You have to be active to bring about that end, even though you don't know whether you're going to succeed. And with something like Just Stop Oil, we'll never know whether we succeeded, even if things get a bit better and some things are improved. We'll never say, yeah, I won't wake up tomorrow and go, hooray, Just Stop Oil's done what it did. So, but some chapters do have a little end as you go along the story. Here you can see these are all people from the southwest, 2 Stroud faces amongst them. And this was last week when they were found not guilty for one of those roadblocks in 2022 where people sat in the road and got dragged around. They all sat in the road, I can't remember where, and they were found not guilty last week because what they had done was deemed proportionate to the disruption and destruction they were trying to prevent. But I think what's interesting is, again, it's Alice. Alice is there in the blue skirt and things. This was something she said about this group. And in a way, I put this slide here as another attempt to try to control the narrative. These are the people who are Just Stop Oil. They're not long-haired hippies, the great unwashed or whatever, or people on trust funds. We get it all shouted at, or, you know, people without jobs. So everything we can do and everything we can say to try to control the narrative and change the shape of the story feels very, very important. And I think there is hope when this sort of thing is happening. And the case this week with the ECHR, long may they last, upholding the case of the Swiss women against their own government for failing to act on climate is an encouraging story. And again, they were dissenting and they have affected the story a little bit there. So I suppose someone talked about going from protest to resistance to governance, and Just Stop Oil is dabbling in politics, but it's not an aim to govern at all. You know, we're looking at alternative methods of deliberative democracy along with other movements, and that's great. But how the story ends now, what the next chapters of the story depend on everyone on this call, depend on me, they depend on every act and every conversation in which we participate. So if you do feel interested in joining us or in using Just Stop Oil as a vehicle, or just in finding out more about us, you can look at the website, which is there. You don't have to put yourself on the line. We often need people just to be outside police stations overnight to make sure that when someone's released, they're looked after, or to go and support people in court. On the subject of which, we need a couple of court supporters in Stratford magistrates tomorrow for two of the marching mums. If you happen to be in London, that would be great. But I think overall, let's just do our best to make the ending as happy as we possibly can. Thank you for listening. Thanks very much. And let's hope Stroud carries on dissenting. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to stop sharing. Oh, there we go. Go on.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Jill. If everybody wants to turn their cameras on for their final sort of questions and a little chat, what a powerful, incredible kind of conclusion to the three talks this evening, and all of the themes kind of coming through again. And I was really struck this time, which I hadn't really considered in the previous two, but are also true of this kind of going to accuse you all of like double heroism, basically. You're not just kind of fighting for the cause that is clearly for people and for future and for love, but you're also protecting all of our freedoms, because the very act of protest can only continue as long as it is being done, and in spite of, as you said, an increasingly kind of draconian legislation that's trying to stop it. And yeah, I think it's just really incredible to hear about what you're doing. I'm gonna scroll down and get some of the comments and questions here. So Barbara says she's always been surprised by the hostility that protesters, especially Exile and Stop Oil, suffer. Can't the public see that this is a principled and publicly spirited stand? Do you want to say anything about that, Jill?
Yeah, that's a really interesting perception, actually. And I'm sure other people like Bill, who've been with me on the roads, and Val would. It's true that we get that. I was knocked over in Bristol, and Adam was one of those chucked around in one of the early roadblocks. And you do face it, and there's lots of beeping. But it's changed, actually. Initially, the first ones we did, I think that was the predominant thing that we faced. But you did get supportive people coming past and quietly tapping you on the shoulder and saying thank you for being brave. I remember I was watching Bill sitting in the road, and he just looked up at me and said, somebody just spat in my face. We did get a mix. But I think the violence and the shoving round is over exaggerated by the press. If they don't film people talking to us and saying thank you, we think you're all heroes. They film the angst and that, the aggro, and they put it on. And I think sometimes they set it up. We had a cyclist come along and do stuff, and it was just so the media were there straight away, and the whole thing was set up. So there are lots of lies, but increasingly we get support, we get applause, we get gratitude, we get people going, thank you for your courage. And I'd say on balance, it's at worst 50-50 against us, and 54 for 50% for us as well. I mean, there was one occasion where we were walking down, I don't even know where we were walking really slowly down a road, and we were held up in the traffic. We couldn't move because the traffic wasn't moving. And but we were walking past a primary school, and the parents and kids lined up along the pavement and applauded and thanked us as we walked very, very slowly through no fault of our own past them. And so, Barbara, it is an interesting question. And yes, it is scary, but it's also really heartening the increasing support we're getting.
That's really heartening to hear. And Adrian asked a really interesting question. Do you have any feeling that the police don't want to be doing what they're doing, and that they're, don't want to be part of a system that isn't working?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think my experience is I've only had 2 arrests, but they seem to chime with those of many other people. My first arrest on that Mums March, my arresting officer sort of put his hand over his little camera thing and said, I don't want to be doing this. I agree with everything you do. And they treat us with civility. One of my friends spent an hour in a police van exchanging vegan recipes with her arresting officer. But then you sort of say to them, well, at what point they say, well, we're just doing our job. And there is a point you say to them, well, what does the government have to ask you to do to us when you say, no, I'm not going to do my job anymore? How far would this government have to ask them to act against us? It's all right. I'm just doing my job is a bit of a get out, isn't it? So they're really nice people. They treat us with civility. They very often voice support for what we do. Well, for the cause, if not for how we're going about it. So yeah, they're not against us.
Arrest you. Yeah. Interesting, really interesting. And And then Barbara says that she's seeing increasingly people planning no-fly holidays, and something in the tide of opinion is changing. Do you feel that as well?
It's hard to say because sometimes you're in your bubble, aren't you? And you know, my sister's planning about 6 flights this year because she can. So it depends. Yes, there's a change, I think, and I think these airport actions will be really difficult. I suspect they will encounter violence. I think it's going to be nasty, but I think it will be part of the turning of the tide. I think it will play an important part in that, and not just flights, but symbolically, like we are living in. You know, if there's any symbol of how bonkers we are, was that hot summer where people were flying into countries that were on fire in order to have their holiday. You know, it's bonkers, as Adrian said earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I was talking about that the other day because people were talking about you know, friends of theirs that had flown to a ski holiday and they were complaining there wasn't enough snow. Like the irony.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Then Barbara also says that the proportionate judgment sounds like a landmark. I mean, not expecting you to know that definitively, but is that something that, you know, is that cause excitement in the Just Stop Oil kind of?
I think I haven't had to fight a case yet, but there is. Oh, Bill, remind me what it's called. There's a previous case where it was used, and it's often used now as a precedent. Some magistrates will listen, some won't, and some will accept it, and some don't. And trouble is, they're bringing some for earlier actions. You get the blocking a highway charge, for which there are certain defences. Then the police upped it to what was section 12, so there are other defences, and then they've upped the ante to section 7, which a lot of us were arrested on, which is the one where there are fewer defences and it can have a custodial sentence and unlimited fines. Whereas that was a new thing that they brought in to try to stop us in November. So again, what we're experiencing is the luck of the draw in court. Some of the judges and magistrates really don't like us, boom, boom, and they'll do what they can. I would say the balance is towards ones who seem to be on our side, but no one's quite had the courage to twist the law yet in our favour. But they're letting people off or going for minimal fines. So one was chucked out last week just because the judge was impatient with the Crown Prosecution Service for not getting their ducks in a row. But I think he was looking for an excuse to just chuck it out. So
again, heartening. So Adrian says, I sense the anti-protest brigade has been fueled by obviously our right-wing government, as well as things such as the coverage of the protest by the Daily Fail, etc. Is that a sort of feeling you're getting as well, Gill?
Yeah, and sometimes we're in that awful position. I think one way I can say, hey, look, we've forced the government to show their true colours and how awful they are, but then have our actions caused more, worse oppression of our right to protest because of how we've been framed. So, but yeah, it's the right wing press, it's the Daily poison, and it's they use. I mean, the more recent stuff trying to frame us all as terrorists and stuff, and therefore we need crushing is evidently part of that narrative, isn't it? And we've just got to reclaim the storytelling, I think.
So then Bill says, I'm in court for a Just Stop Oil arrest on May the 24th, so hoping to persuade the judge on proportionality. And we're all behind you on that, Bill, really hoping that proportionality comes through for you as well.
Yeah, and if anyone can be in court to support, Bill, just one sec. If anyone can be in court to support someone like Bill, I think it makes a difference to show Just Stop Oil has supporters who are decent people who can behave in court and who listen politely. So if Bill tells us when he's there.
Yeah, brilliant. Go, Bill.
Can I? Yeah, I just wanted to just a couple of things. So the charge that I'm up for, which Alice was up for, is willful obstruction of the highway. And my defence is going to be that I wasn't creating an obstruction, I was trying to remove an obstruction, i.e. government policy, an obstruction to sustainable life. And I think it's approximately 40 to 50% of cases are thrown out by the judge. And it's heard, although it's a magistrate's court, it's heard by a judge. And the signs are very good because in the first, I went to a hearing which got delayed, and my judge seems extremely sympathetic. It's it is a strange thing that the law is so completely open to interpretation by judges. You know, they're not twisting it. They're just, you know, at the end of the day, it's a personal decision. You know, there's a particular judge, Silas Reeve, that doesn't let defendants mention the word climate in court, and says that it's a matter of opinion that there's a climate crisis. You know, stuff like this. So within the legal profession, there's a huge variation in the legal interpretation. But I also just want to flag up that I mean, it's been great, lovely talk, Gill, and it's kind of reconnected me. And when I did sit in the road, I just absolutely felt I was in the right place. I was totally connected to the planet. And I just want to flag up just how much of my time I spend feeling completely despairing, completely hopeless about climate. And then, you know, but then I can come back to it, come back to some engagement and go, no, this is my truth. I can still find a place to speak my truth. And I suppose I want to say that because I'm saying that to myself, but to anybody else here that spends a lot of time just feeling overwhelmed and despairing, it's, you know, that's just the shit of what it's like to live today, I think. Well, for me it is, and you know, it's good to find I can come back to a place where I do have hope and connection with others. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think many of us, I certainly do feel the same way, and it's really just it's heartening, and we must draw strength from each other, you know, to carry on. So yeah, so David says an admirably brave and inspiring speech, Gill.
Thank you.
Agree with that. And then Marianne says, when we have an action on the bridge over the A38, ER and climate, etc., we find that most motorists hoot and wave in a supportive way, and only about 10% do so with the V sign. Yeah, I'd echo that actually, just in my very small way when I do the monthly bike ride that we do. We get, you know, lots of people waving and a couple of people doing the unpleasant symbols, shall we say. And she also says we need to get parties to promise to repeal this awful anti-protest legislation in their manifestos. Yeah, definitely agree with. And Val says injunctions are now stopping further protest across the country and demanding huge costs from activists. There's a National Defend Our Juries action on Monday in every Crown Court in the country. Don't know if you wanted to say any more about that. Action or...
Val, do you want to?
Yeah, well, it's every Crown Court, which is phenomenal, actually. And I'm going to Swindon. There's an action in front of in Gloucester. So it is a way of people getting involved. It's non-arrestable pretty much, but we've really got to, you know, it's really getting through. People are shocked by the stories about judgments, and now there's a letter that's been sent, and hundreds and hundreds of barristers have signed the letter, and, you know, pretty high-profile people asking for Judge Silas's resignation or bringing him to book about, you know, what he's doing. And yeah, interesting.
That's good. Yeah, interesting times. Thank you, Val. Thanks for sharing that information. I'm sure there's, you know, maybe people could contact Just Stop Oil if they want to sort of find out more about that.
Yeah. I mean, you can email me or contact me, or if you just want to find, and then I could put you onto Val, whatever. Yeah. Happy to be a conduit.
Brilliant. And Bill says, Rich Felgate, the maker of Finite Movie, is crowdfunding to finish editing Everything Is Fine, which is a feature film about Just Stop Oil, and he needs more money in the next fortnight. So more info and a link is here. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we could send that link out as well when we send out this video talk, possibly. But yeah, thank you for putting that in the chat. And then there's another link to the jury's action. So yeah, I don't know if we can kind of save save those as well. So that's all in the chat, and I guess we have maybe a little bit, maybe like a few minutes if anybody would like to actually kind of say something as well to any of our speakers, or just anything that they're kind of thinking or feeling. Yeah, please go ahead.
If I could just add to the talk about the jury's action, I think it's crazy again, isn't it, that it started with this Trudy Warner who stood outside at court with the words that are inside the Old Bailey, just saying that juries have a right to decide by conscience, and she stands a chance of prison. And it's a really good example of numbers are needed, because if all these other people hadn't turned up, she would be alone and probably put in prison without anyone noticing. And now it would be outrageous to put her in prison, because you'd have to put so many people in prison for so I think there's a sort of the power of numbers is really important in some cases. Although having said that, Just Stop Oil isn't about being popular, really. So we're not, yeah, we'd love the whole country to come with us, but we also know that, well, I think, sorry, I'm twisting onto this, but we're sort of the radical flank. And I think it's once we got more name recognition, membership of things like Friends of the Earth increased sort of exponentially with our name recognition. And I really hope that happens with sort of the Dream Party as well and things like that, you know, you raise the issue, they say, oh, we don't like what they're doing, but I think what they're doing is important, and they realise where they can go with it.
Yeah, and it's all kind of pieces of the puzzle, isn't it? Mary, did you come in?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say I wouldn't underestimate the importance of having conversations locally with people in the same way, you know, not getting into confrontation. Well, I'm interested in why you think that. And it's the same as the conversations about racism and other things, you know, having the conversations. I have noticed, even in Little Chudley in Devon, there's been a little bit of change about a number of things about racism, because we're doing an anti-racist group, but also climate change. That over the last 5 years, I would say there's just been a bit, and it's not the bubble I'm in, it's the people that surprise me that go, oh, I had no idea. Do you know what I mean? So I think I wouldn't underestimate the power of conversations locally and with friends and with, or helping other people have conversations in their family, because it's quite important.
Yeah, I really agree with that, Mary. I think I've sort of had little conversations over the years, and I'm surprised at just, you know, who you are can change a lot of things. You know, outside my kids' school now, there's very many more cargo bikes than there were when I started to cycle. And that's not because of me, that's because of a general wave. But, you know, I think people seeing me and my, you know, a couple of my friends that were on it, you know, that you being there and doing stuff does make a bit of a difference, doesn't it? Adrian, what did you want to say?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. And thanks, Jill, for really fascinating and stimulating talk. What worries me is that we have gone from, I've put a link in the chat to the eviction night at the trees, and it's comedic. I mean, I've watched it, you know, several times recently, and you know, people are lifted up and sort of put over there, and then you see them, they walk round and then they join up at the bottom of the trees again. It is that bad. Somebody, you know, gets manhandled, and you know, they make a lot of fuss and the guy's let go. You know, in 35 years we've come from that to, you know, what Gill and Bill and others are facing now. You know, we have become so much more authoritarian and clamping down on protest. And sadly, you know, luckily, I think we'll be shot of this wretched government fairly soon. But sadly, I don't think that the incoming Labour Party is going to be that agent of change that we need. And I think when people start talking about, oh, well, you know, Greens and Labour, very, very close. No, they're not. Because Labour will not do anything, I believe, to repeal the sort of draconian legislation that affects so many of our rights to do things. You know, right to roam is also high on people's agendas. So, you know, I think part of what we have to do is to continually put pressure on people who stand for office to say, what are you going to do to roll back this tide that has enveloped us in terms of turning ordinary people into, you know, criminals for standing up for what they believe in.
Absolutely. That's, yeah, really important. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the speakers in reverse order. So Gill, then Adrian, then Harry, to just give us a little bit of a takeaway. What would you like us to take away, and what would you like to kind of say as a final?
Oh, crikey, this is mean. I don't know. I guess once you decide your values, it's not backing down. It's standing for what's right. And if we can't do it now in Stroud, no one else is going to do it. No one else is going to come and do it for us. So I think stand firm and decide our values. And we are the generation that has the weight on our shoulders of deciding the future of mankind. So yeah, there you go, a little takeaway. Thank you.
Thanks, Gill. Adrian?
I think I've kind of said it, but yeah, I totally agree with Gill. You know, stand up for what you believe in. And if you think it's right, then find others who believe it with you.
So true. Harry?
Well, I must admit, I mean, having listened to Gill and having obviously seen Just Stop Oil over the last few years, it makes me realise how limited our outlook was, you know, back in the High Street Action Group days. Really, we were just trying to hold a building up, which is a pretty easy thing to do, really. Pitting yourself against the entire oil industry and pretty much all of the national media is a bit of a bigger take, actually. And I'm deeply impressed by the commitment that those people have to that cause, which I think I would be totally scared of. So please just carry on doing that, because it is something, as you say, there is increasing support for, but you'll never know it because the press will never actually exhibit that back to us. You know, we won't get reflected back to us. I mean, funnily enough, during Adrian referred to the fact that we now only have one local press outlet, whereas 30, 40 years ago, we had several. I mean, the other one he missed out was The Citizen, who was a really had almost a national presence, actually, and had two reporters in Stroud. I mean, one of my best friends, Jackie Totterdale, was the NUJ representative in Stroud, you know, when she worked for the Stroud News and Journal. There was a whole, it takes us back to the days when trade unions had at least some say in the running of their own jobs. Whereas now they're completely unrecognised. We've been run over by loud corporations now and big money, and we are, to some degree, all of society is complicit with it, you know, and we do have to make a noise about it. So thank you.
Brilliant way to end. Thank you, Harry. I don't want you to do yourself down, though. Everybody's actions are really, really important, and, you know, think globally, act locally, I think is still a really valid thing. I'd like to thank everybody so much for coming this evening, for the fantastic questions, the wonderful comments, the love in the room, and all of our absolutely fantastic and inspiring speakers. Thank you so much. And yeah, let's carry on. Onwards and upwards.
Thank you, Becky. You've been a brilliant chair. Thank you very much.
You have. Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.